You have your Bibles or your New Testaments with you this morning. I invite you to turn to John's Gospel, chapter 11. John chapter 11. And talking to some of our youth this morning, they all seem to have a good week at camp. And for that, I am grateful. It's up here. It's like, I can't get rid of it. John's Gospel, chapter 11. I want to begin reading in verse 1, where John tells us that now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was waiting for Peter to speak. And after all, Simon Peter was the leader of the disciples. He was a part of Jesus' inner circle. He was a confidant. He was also the spokesman for the group. Rarely, if ever, was Peter at a loss for words. In all likelihood, my guess is Thomas was simply waiting for Peter to speak again as he usually did. But when Thomas realized that Peter was going to remain silent, then he himself felt the need to speak up. Let us also go that we may die with him, Thomas says, in response to the insistence of Jesus that he returned to Bethany to help his dear friends Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha. However, the words of Thomas, I think, did more than just get the disciples moving. For you see, I think his words revealed an unparalleled level of loyalty, of commitment, and leadership. Quite honestly, what Thomas said was outstanding. And if anything, Thomas should be commended for his courage, for his bravery. And I will grant you, we're not used to seeing Thomas in such a positive light. I mean, after all, what is our reference when we find somebody that's uncertain? We call them what? Doubting Thomas. We usually associate him with doubting due primarily because of his response to the news of Jesus' resurrection. John also records those words of Thomas in chapter 20, verse 25, in which Thomas says to the group of disciples gathered together, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hand in his side, I will not believe it." The reason for today's text is because in this text we see an entirely different side of Thomas. In this text we see a committed follower of Jesus that was willing to pay the ultimate price to accompany Jesus to Bethany. It's an image of Thomas that I think stands in stark contrast to the post-resurrection Thomas. Which then begs the question, well, okay, which of them is the real Thomas? Is it the one we see here in John chapter 11, or is it the one we see in John chapter 20? Which is the real one? Actually, both of them are. It's just that this morning I want us to look at Thomas through the lens of John chapter 11. Because I think it's a story that can shed some much needed light upon an individual who was a remarkable man of faith, but perhaps more than that was a good role model for all believers. I want to take just a few moments and explain that. When Jesus received word that his good friend Lazarus, was seriously ill, Jesus made plans to return to Bethany, a village near the holy city of Jerusalem. And upon telling his disciples of his plan, they began trying to discourage him. And look again at what he says in verse 8. "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back there?" Essentially what the disciples are saying in the Webster translation, are you nuts? You see, it's evident that the disciples feared for the life of Jesus. And yet their insistence that he not return was unable to persuade Jesus to change his mind. Jesus was determined to go back, even if he had to go alone. Which makes me wonder, when Thomas realized that, I can't help but wonder, did he wait for Peter to speak? And after all, realizing Peter wasn't going to break the silence, which doesn't much surprise me because I'm not sure I can find a time in Scripture in which Peter actually encouraged Jesus to do anything. Peter was always Debbie Downer, if you will. It appears that Thomas took the lead and he insisted that the disciples go with Jesus, even though most likely they're going to pay a high price for doing so. He simply says to them, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." And it's in that statement that I see in Thomas an incredible level of intense loyalty, intense commitment, and intense leadership. Because in that statement, Thomas reveals exactly what it means to take up a cross and follow Jesus. You see, Thomas was fully aware of the risk. Thomas was fully aware of the danger of going near Jerusalem during Passover. And yet he was willing to go down that road. The question is why? Why was Thomas so willing to say to the other disciples, "Let's go with him"? Let's go with him. You see, I think Thomas said it because he believed in Jesus and he believed in the work that Jesus was doing. Now, I don't think Thomas fully understood what was happening in Bethany. I'm not even sure he fully understood why Jesus insisted upon going, but that simply wasn't necessary at this point. What was necessary was placing his trust in Jesus and following him as he had done for almost 3 years. You see, Thomas believed in Jesus. Thomas knew Jesus' heart. He knew Jesus' passion. Thomas had seen the difference. He had seen the difference that Jesus had made in so many lives, and he knew that he represented the only hope that some people had that their life could improve in any way. And Thomas believed enough in Jesus that he was willing to invest his life in helping Jesus to make hope visible. He wasn't about to turn his back on him now, just because the risk was high. And therefore, Thomas says, let's follow Jesus. I'm going to follow Jesus into the eye of the storm, and to all of you other disciples, I encourage you to go with us. You see, the reason Thomas did what he did was because I believe he believed in Jesus and he believed in Jesus' mission, his work. But I also believe that Thomas felt a great deal of compassion for Jesus. That he wanted to be there with Jesus during what was going to be some of the darkest hours of his life. You see, Thomas knew that Jesus had in that moment to be dealing with two very powerful emotions: grief and fear. You see, one of Jesus' closest friends is dying. And to help him could lead to Jesus' own death. My guess is Thomas felt the tension and saw the stress that Jesus was under, and his heart had to have ached for Jesus. And because of that, he simply could not abandon him. At least not now. Why? Because friends don't desert friends in their greatest hour of need. And Jesus was Thomas's friend. So what did Thomas do? Well, he took the lead. He spoke when it seemed that no one else was going to speak, and he encouraged the disciples to come with him and with Jesus. If there ever was a time that Jesus needed somebody to step in and do that, it was in this moment. And Thomas rose to the occasion. Why? Because love compelled him to do the difficult. Love compelled Thomas to take risk. Love compelled Thomas to go to places that he probably rather would not have chosen to go. Places that he would rather have avoided. Now, my guess is there's not a single parent in this room that doesn't understand what it is I'm talking about. Because our children will oftentimes take us places we would rather not go. Okay? So the question becomes, why do we as parents travel down those roads? Because the love we have for our children compels us to do the difficult. The love we have for our children compels us to go to places we'd much rather avoid. Here's the principle. Every loving relationship will demand that you take risk and that you travel down roads that are perilous. And if you don't believe me, just ask Thomas, the one who bravely said in our text today, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." Which brings me to this question for you this morning. How would you measure your level of commitment to Jesus Christ and his mission? In other words, what kind of disciple are you? How much of your life have you invested in the work and the mission of Jesus Christ? Have there been those times that you've been willing to take the lead and encourage others to follow Jesus? You see, I have other questions. What risk have you taken or sacrifices have you made to continue the good work of Jesus? Where this morning do you need to go? What is it this morning you need to do that's going to require great courage? In short, the question for each and every one of us this morning is the following: is our faith up to the challenge? Is our faith up to the challenge? Thomas's was. For me, one of the lessons of the story is the importance of faith. You see, Thomas had to believe with all of his heart that Jesus knew what he was doing, and that more would be lost if he didn't follow Jesus than would have been gained had he decided not to follow Jesus. Mary and Martha had to make the same decision, as the text reveals for us later. My question this morning is, what about you and I? Do you and I have that kind of faith? But there's a second question. In addition to the kind of faith that we have, my second question is this: who is there in our lives that might be in need of us walking with them during some dark hours of their own lives? You see, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they needed Jesus. You read the story, Jesus needed the disciples. Who do you have in your life that may be struggling with grief or fear that simply needs your help? What road do you need to travel with them in order that they're not traveling alone? What difference could you make in their life by simply being their friend, being there for them? How might your compassion and courage inspire them? How might your compassion and courage strengthen them? These are all questions that come out of this very simple text. But there's yet one more question. And that question is, who's walked with you? Who has walked with you in your life? Who has made a difference when you needed someone the most? Think about that for a moment. Who do you know that during a very trying time in your life has walked with you and made a difference? Because my next question is this: chances are you're never ever going to forget them, are you? You see, I don't believe Jesus ever forgot Thomas's compassion and his courage. I mean, maybe that's the reason why Jesus was so kind and understanding when Thomas struggled with the news of his resurrection. Because if you think about it and recall, Jesus made a second appearance to the disciples in the upper room. It occurred a week after the news of the resurrection had spread, but Jesus, a week later, appears for a second time in the upper room with the disciples just to talk to Thomas. Why on earth would he do that? Perhaps he remembered what Thomas had done for him during one of the most difficult times in his life, and Jesus simply wanted to return the favor. Thomas was there for me when I needed him. I can be there for Thomas when he needs me. Final question this morning. Are you in need of returning a favor to someone? Do you need to return a favor, or do you need to do for someone what they have done for you or someone else has done for you because they're struggling? They're hurting. Perhaps all they need is an encouraging word. Perhaps what they need is somebody to simply be willing to listen to them and offer their help to be there and to walk with them. Here's the thing. If you can think of anybody in your life that's needing that, then perhaps you simply this morning need to ask Jesus to help you make that journey of compassion, to make that journey of goodwill. Maybe you need to ask Jesus to help you out with that, to give you the words to speak, to give you the courage to take the risk. Because here's the thing, folks. Jesus is already very, very familiar with the road you need to travel. He's very familiar with the things that we need to be doing. The question is, like Thomas, do we have the courage? Do we have the commitment? Do we have the loyalty to do what Jesus would have us do, that we might minister in His name and thereby make a difference in the life of those who are in need?